First, though, let's get to our top story, the escalating situation in the Middle East, Iran and Israel. The White House confirming Washington is keeping the door open to talks with Tehran, even as missile exchanges between Iran and Israel enter now their 7th day, actually 8th. Quick correction there. U.S. President Donald Trump has been deliberating about whether or not to join Israel in military attacks against Iran. He says he'll make a decision within 2 weeks. Here is what White House Press Secretary Karen Leavitt told reporters in a press briefing earlier on. Take a listen.
I know there has been a lot of speculation amongst all of you in the media regarding the president's decision making and whether or not the United States will be directly involved. In light of that news, I have a message directly from the president, and I quote, "Based on the fact that there's a substantial chance of negotiations that may or may not take place with Iran in the near future, I will make my decision whether or not to go within the next 2 weeks."
All right, so in the market, oil popping another 3% overnight as Iran and Israel continued exchanging fire. Take a look at the price action now. Front month light sweet, top of your screen there at 75.29. That's up about 1/5 of 1%. Brent, no movement just yet, but we'll continue tracking it. The global benchmark at 78.85. This is the highest we've seen pretty much a year to date, or at least in the last 5 months or so. Wall Street, no action there, closed for Juneteenth, as was the bond market, but they get back to trade tonight Asia time. Futures right now are telegraphing or handicapping what looks like a down start, but again, several hours to go yet. We'll wait and see what happens. Things can't change, and they usually do between now and then. I want to show you what dollar's doing, though. Bring up the different chart there. Shall we do that? Yeah, here we go. DXY, top of your screen. We are at 98.91, so it's losing steam on that gauge. Dollar yen, though, is looking firmer, 145.48. The common European single currency, the euro, 114.98, and cable, 134.65. So we've been talking a lot about why people aren't loving the dollar as much as they used to, and you'd think they would, with tariffs, inflation, and now 3 wars going on at the same time. Now, Ken Rogoff says this didn't start just yesterday. The love's been fading for quite a while. His new book, Our Dollar, Your Problem, out last month, argues it's happening because the dollar's global dominance, built on luck and post-war might, faces threats from, among other things, crypto, China's currency, the renminbi, rising debt, and also political instability, all of which risks financial instability at home in the U.S. as well as abroad. He joins us now live. Dr. Ken, great to see you and always a pleasure, and thank you for your time. Appreciate it. So listen, a lot to talk to you about this morning, including your new book. But first off, I want to get your hot take, your thoughts on what's going on in the Middle East now, Israel and Iran. Because, you know, you spend a lot of time up in Davos every year, I know. So you're talking to politicians, to government leaders, to think tankers, NGOs, and the whole lot, right? The texts you've been getting, the messages, the emails, the calls, what sort of sense do you get about what is going on over there?
Well, there's a wide range of views on what the right thing to do is. I think the majority of people think that this is a bottomless pit if the U.S. gets into it, and that if the U.S. isn't prepared to occupy Iraq, God forbid, and even if it's successful in bringing down the regime, you're going to get something like happened in Syria or Libya afterwards. And if the U.S. strikes and it's unsuccessful, it doesn't get rid of the nuclear bomb, it will accelerate it. It's an absolutely critical moment in Trump's second presidency. This could be one of the couple biggest decisions that he has to make. There's no great answer. Iran is a big problem. There was really a strong case for Israel to do something from its perspective. But for the United States, this is a tough call, and it could lead to a lot of market volatility if the action really heats up.
You know, you've been around for a while, as have I, right? Does this feel like another Iraq moment to you? And I know you're staying in Harvard, and, the Crimson has their own problems, which we can talk about a little bit later on. But I ask because, over in New York, old Cy Hirsch, and he's been around the block as well. His latest post on Substack, he's saying his sources tell him that, there could be a strike, and a massive one this weekend. What are you hearing?
I mean, I think it's more likely than not that Trump is going to move on this, that he really does believe that if Iran gets a nuclear bomb, it's an existential threat to the world. But on the other hand, European information, British information really was that Iran was not yet building a bomb. A very tough call. But I do think it's more likely than not that he strikes. It's his instinct, it really is to want to negotiate. But he's up against, a rather ideological foe who doesn't really want to give anything, no matter how dire the situation. So no, I don't. This is a big moment, and I trust that Trump has very good information, and I actually think he'll make a good decision if there is one, but I'm not sure there is one.
Yeah, fingers crossed, because the other thing he's fighting is his own MAGA base as well, which we can get into a little bit later on. But let's get into your book, Ken, if we could. Our Dollar, Your Problem. And this, of course, references that famous quote from Nixon's Treasury Secretary John Connally, right? Just explain the genesis of that.
Yeah, so the main countries that were circulating around the dollar back when Nixon was president were the European countries, Japan, Canada. The rest of the world really wasn't part of the dollar bloc in a significant way. Everyone was pegging to the dollar, and the dollar was pegging to gold. But the U.S. started inflating. Nixon said, well, I don't think we can keep the gold price anymore. It was $35 now. It's $35 now. It's up by about a factor of 100 now. So he sent Connally, and the Europeans complained, and what are we going to do? And Connally said, it's our dollar, your problem. And that title really speaks to me because it represents sort of U.S. arrogance, but also, hey, the 1970s were terrible for us after we departed completely from gold. It was our problem, too.
Yeah, Ken, I was watching you on a pod, I can't remember with who, right? And you said this half in jest, cheekily and also jokingly, but you said, today it could easily be our Trump, your problem. What did you mean by that?
No, our Donald, your problem was.
Yeah, our Donald, your problem. You're
well,
right.
no, I think the current no worries. The title, as I have it, I think fits the moment. I honestly finished this book. With a university press, they're slow as molasses. I finished the book before I knew who would win the U.S. election. I didn't think the dollar was in for any bed of roses under Harris. I think it's been in decline. The U.S. has budget problems that would have been bad under any president. Federal Reserve independence is not as sacrosanct as people think. I certainly thought there would be problems, but I didn't. I knew Trump was going to have tariffs. I talked about that in the book. But Liberation Day was a little crazier than even I imagined.
Yeah, the fade in the dollar until just the last day or so as a place where money runs for safety, that's been going on for a while already. Do you believe that the Trump administration since January, since it became a lot clearer what his policies were, exacerbated it and just accelerated this? And weak dollar, his Treasury Secretary now, Scott Bessent, has been out pretty publicly saying, look, this is something that the administration wants.
Well, the Treasury Secretary tries to talk the dollar up or down at their risk, because it almost never works, although, I certainly think Scott Bessent's done a good job. The big factor everybody's looking at is that interest rates have risen and the dollar has fallen. But I think both of those trends were in play even if Harris came in. Yeah, absolutely. What happened on April 2nd was stunning. People were selling. But the dollar is very, very high. Even now, it's come off maybe, 5% on a real basis, at most 10% from what was a very high value before. I don't think we've seen anything like it since 2002, 1985. So I actually think the dollar was headed down. I talk about that. I stuck my neck out in the book, even knowing it wouldn't come out for a while. And I think real interest rates are going to be higher for a very, very long time. That era of low interest rates is over. So Trump has been an accelerant of trends that were already happening. I don't think he's a cause. I think if Harris had won, she was his opponent, in case people forget. I think we would have seen some similar trends, but without necessarily all the theatrics and drama.
All right, let's talk about what could be the potential cavalry over the horizon to save the day if you're right and rates do spike. I mean, right now at the Fed, we don't have Paul Volcker, we have Jay Powell, and I know that you think he's been doing a great job. The president obviously does not think so. I mean, this whole idea of central bank independence in the United States is at the core, I think, of the dollar's value, right? But that is under threat right now. I want to ask you, I mean, the president's, at least his latest statements, right? He's going, oh, okay, well, I'm not going to fire the guy. I'm going to let his term run out until, April or May of next year. But, if we start getting louder noises about who he wants to take over, it could be Kevin Warsh, could be a number of other people we don't know. That would literally create a shadow Fed chair, which would make for all kinds of confusion and complication in the markets, don't you think?
Yeah, well, I think until he actually appoints someone, everyone's going to be very careful about what they say. If you're a candidate for the job and you're making public statements, you're basically speaking to Trump, and you want to be very careful. So I don't think anybody's going to be running a shadow Fed where they second guess the Fed because Trump might not agree with what they were saying. Really hard to know. There's a lot Trump can do to put pressure on the Fed if he wanted to. He can cut their budget. He can stack the Fed. He doesn't have a lot of new appointments, but he can add people. That's an old idea. Elizabeth Warren, who's on the other side, she's on the left. She's a senator. She has proposed that. There are a lot of people who want to put pressure on the Fed. It's not just President Trump. Hopefully they'll hang tough. But I don't think it's going to be easy because the U.S. budget's difficult. Interest rates are going up. If there's particularly a war, some major challenge to our finances, Fed independence could prove fragile.
What we've been seeing for quite some time now, what folks in the market term de-dollarization, is just a symptom of a lot of things that you talk about in your book, Ken. I'm really curious. I mean, debt obviously does not help the situation, probably exacerbates it, right? We're running about 120% of GDP, debt as a percentage of GDP. But then again, when I take a look at alternative or other currencies, right, where money is running for safety, obviously the Swiss franc, and also the Japanese yen, I'm wondering relatively what's so great about that when they're running a debt to GDP percentage of, we're talking north of 250%. So why not the dollar?
Well, I mean, they think that Japan's in trouble, by the way. I mean, they've had this zero interest policy. All their financial system, their insurance companies, their pension funds are stuffed with debt, which is now, gone way down in value as interest rates rise. It's put tremendous pressure on Japan. But I mean, the core of de-dollarization is China. So let's remember, we talked about when Nixon went off the gold standard, the U.S. lost Europe. It never came back. Europe is not part of the dollar bloc. Where is the dollar bloc? Well, the center is in Asia. It's half the dollar bloc. And China, for a very long time, probably should have decoupled significantly from the dollar. It's happening. And let's face it, the sanctions are playing a role. They have to cut back their treasury holdings. They're less inclined to peg to the dollar. And I don't think the rest of Asia is necessarily going to instantly follow China, but it's their major trading partner, so it'll certainly influence them. So that was a pressure that's been going on for a decade, and it's accelerated. But as you say, there are also some problems coming from the middle. So I don't think it's that the dollar is replaced, is that it loses market share. Just as Europe broke off, I think we're going to see Asia be much, much less dollarized, say 5-10 years from now. And that's going to raise U.S. interest rates. It's going to make sanctions less effective. So it's not the same thing as replacing the dollar, but it's certainly going to defang it to some extent. And it's going to put pressure on U.S. budget, interest rates, and Americans are not prepared for any of that.
Yeah, that's the scary part, right, Ken? To that point, how do you think things are going in the Senate with the president's big, beautiful bill?
I think he's going to get it passed. The Republicans just have to, and I don't know how it's going to work out. And, basically Trump 1 had a lot of good ideas, I think helped the economy. Trump 2 is Trump 1 plus a lot of bad ideas. And I don't know how much they're going to pare back on it. But I think the thing that I can't get my head wrapped around is that Trump, after campaigning that Biden was bursting, with these deficits and they're causing inflation, he looks to be exceeding Biden's deficits. I mean, he'll claim it's not, but I think any reasonable estimate will say that they're going to be higher when Trump's done. The dollar, it's the reserve currency. Everybody loves the dollar, but they might require a higher interest rate to love it as much. I think that the U.S. is sort of reaching the end of the road where it can go from plateau to plateau and get higher and higher without bond markets responding, and they are. That puts more pressure on the budget. And I think eventually, and my book sort of predicts this, we're going to see a situation where we're going to get another burst of inflation. There's not going to be another out. But, I said, I think 5 to 7 years in the book. I would say 4 or 5 years now.
Ooh, okay. Listen, when you trace the timeline, Ken, you talked about 71, Nixon takes dollar off the gold standard, 85, we have the Plaza Accord, right? And that was with Japan. And now folks are talking about Stephen Mirren's idea, who's the head of the President's Council of Economic Advisors, about a Mar-a-Lago Accord, which would involve China, but which would also involve, foreign holders of U.S. treasuries being literally forced to go, look, here's 100-year paper. We'll do a swap with you. Is that going to fly? What do you think of that plan and idea?
Well, obviously it's not top of mind at the moment, but coming from Trump, who seems willing to do, what shall we call it, heterodox economic solutions, I wouldn't rule anything out if the U.S. comes under pressure. I mean, obviously it would be almost suicidal. It's a debt default. We're going to give you 100-year bonds. They're discount bonds, no interest on them. We'll tell you what they're going to be worth in 100 years. And by the way, you can't sell them to anyone. Imagine if you're managing the Chinese foreign exchange and you get caught on the wrong side of that. I mean, your head's going to be on a chopping block. No wonder they're drastically cutting back on their treasuries. I think everyone's looking at that. How can you know that he's not going to do it? Maybe he'll get mad at you over trade or think that you're too woke or something and then, slap this kind of penalty on you. And the Senate bill that you talked about authorizes the president to put a 20% tax on foreign investors in countries where he's not happy about what they're doing. Goodness. I mean, I think it clearly, it's a warning shot over the bow. But if you're managing even the UK foreign exchange and you think this is all a joke, you're wrong. I think this is a man who believes in intervention, believes in these, the government taking a big role in moving markets. And who knows what he'd do. I don't think it's going to happen out of the blue. But again, we started out talking about Iran and Israel and what's going on there. There are other places we can run into trouble. A shock can hit that puts a lot of pressure on the United States, and our budgets, our debt is already high, our deficit's already high. We might need to spend a lot more. And again, I'm sorry to use the word heterodox, but out-of-the-box solutions. I wouldn't put anything past Trump. And maybe sometimes these are the right things, by the way. I don't want to just say they're stupid, but I think anything is possible.
Yeah, it's the uncertainty, I think, that's killing everybody, right? And with China, and I want to bring in your expertise from a previous life. You've lived an interesting life, Ken, when you were over at the fund at the IMF as the chief economist, right? You know how China works. So what I want to ask you is, you were saying, suggesting that this whole idea of Stephen Mirren's Mar-a-Lago Accord, the Chinese probably, when they first heard about that, they were probably pretty nervous, would be fair to say, right? But to be fair, is it just the United States? Because, some folks trace it back to, let's say, 3 years ago when Russia invaded Ukraine, right? And shortly after that, suddenly, the Russians found that the West had seized and frozen a big chunk of their money, about $300 billion worth. I'm pretty sure that, when China saw that, they were probably thinking like, oh, they can do that? Well, maybe we should think twice about having that much, recycling that much of our surplus into U.S. assets, including treasuries. What do you think?
No, absolutely. So the Chinese were already moving away, but that really lit a fire under them. So it's not just that they might lose their, I think it's up to $2 trillion that may have been pared back somewhat in recent past couple of months. But it's in order to do financial trade. There are many ways the dollar controls the international financial system. And by the way, the Europeans hate it too. And I should have mentioned, Christine Lagarde has been waving her hand as high and forcefully as anyone can see it. We're the euro, we're here, we're going to take advantage of this. She talks about that a lot. But the Chinese are looking at the sanctions, they're looking at the seizure of assets. They're not going to tolerate this for another 10 years. No way. They want, I think, just as Nixon shock broke away Europe, I think we're going to see the Trump shock lead to China breaking away, and it's going to take part of Asia with it, not necessarily pegging to the yuan, but maybe equally looking at the yuan and the dollar the way many countries look at the euro and the dollar today.
Ken, very quickly before we let you go, a couple of minutes left. I want to get your take on what's happening at Harvard, where you teach. It's tough times, right? Under a heck of a lot of pressure, visa restrictions, et cetera. And if I'm not mistaken, I think the foreign student population at Harvard makes up about probably more than a quarter. So, when they're having a hard time either getting in or staying in, that is a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I think, to be fair, there were problems at Harvard that Trump is right about and the conservatives are right about. There's a lack of diversity of thought. Probably DEI went too far. But to sort of want to destroy Harvard, which he seems to have his heart set on, I think of it as like when the Khmer Rouge, brought down the temples, and the same thing happened in Afghanistan. Harvard is a brand that, if China could somehow import it, they'd probably be willing to pay hundreds of billions of dollars for it. It's a very valuable asset to the U.S. and, our university system. Once he brings down Harvard, what else is he going to do? It's a delicate moment. I think he will not be remembered well for destroying Harvard. Another tough choice for him.
All right, Ken, listen, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. Appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Please keep safe, and we'll do it again very soon. Ken Rogoff there from Harvard joining us live this morning. His new book, Our Dollar, Your Problem, out just a month ago. All right, so we've got a new deadline today for U.S. President Donald Trump to make a decision on whether or not to attack Iran. He is inching closer, authorizing plans for strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities, but not yet ordering them to go forward. And this is after Iran struck an Israeli hospital in the southern city of Bathsheba overnight. NBC's Julie Sirkin has more in this report. Take a look.
Overnight, a hospital in the southern part of Israel was directly hit by an Iranian missile. In response, Israel said it would, quote, increase the intensity of attacks. In Washington, President Trump once again meeting with his national security team as he weighs a possible military response to Iran. His White House press secretary delivering this message.
Based on the fact that there's a substantial chance of negotiations that may or may not take place with Iran in the near future, I will make my decision whether or not to go within the next 2 weeks. That's a quote directly from the president.
A decision to go could provoke an attack on U.S. bases and interests in the region, and it could shut down the critical Strait of Hormuz, the only sea passage for major and oil gas producing countries in the Persian Gulf, causing an interruption in the global energy supply. All of this could convince the president to keep the door open to diplomacy.
Iran can and should make a deal.
But he has also been firm that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. And just how far along the country is in developing one appears to be in question. The president and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu say the Iranians are close.
And I think they were a few weeks away from having one.
But the U.S. intelligence community, led by the president's own director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, have said that is not the case. But her views on Iran have long been seen as controversial. Gabbard has also been sidelined in internal discussions about the Israel-Iran conflict, according to multiple officials, causing divisions within Trump's White House as he decides whether the U.S. will get directly involved in another foreign war. Remember, the president ran on being a peacemaker. He also pledged to end overseas wars. So his latest posturing has even his staunchest MAGA supporters at odds with one another. Meanwhile, the Senate is expecting to get its first classified briefing on the situation early next week. In Washington, Julie Sirkin, NBC News.
We have to note and also caution, though, that President Trump has often used the phrase 2 weeks. So a lot of people say maybe that's not a firm timeline.